Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to give folks just like a minute or so to join our Zoom room. Welcome. You are at the Growing School Garden Summit Lightning Talks. See folks joining. Glad to have you here. Give everyone about a minute. We've got a fun lineup of 5 different presenters for you today, so we are going to get started pretty quickly. We'll let folks join our Zoom room. Awesome. Welcome. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started so that we can allow us to get to all of our amazing presenters today. My name is Tristana Perkle, and I'm the director for the School Garden Support Organization-Network, the SGSO-Network. Today, we are featuring lightning talks from the Growing School Garden Summit, which will just be a condensed amount of five-minute talks from 5 different presenters from around the country who are all school garden professionals or working in school gardens in some way, shape, or form. So excited to share that with you today. Just a little agenda for us today. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to get started with sharing an update about the SGSO network, and then we're going to go into our 5 different presenters. We will have reflection time in between each of our presentations to allow you to kind of digest the information that you've just learned, and there will be a Jamboard if you'd like to share your thoughts and reflections. And then we will have about 10 minutes at the end, if all goes well, for Q&A. So as you have questions come up throughout the webinar, please feel free to put those questions into the chat, and I will be organizing them and asking them of our presenters at the end. Next slide, please. A recording, we are recording this webinar, so we'll be sharing that with you via email after the webinar. It'll also be uploaded to our recording library on our website. In just a moment, once I stop speaking, I'm going to share a copy of these slides in the chat with you. So you'll have a copy of that. And afterwards, we are also going to be sharing a kind of a resource guide with all of the relevant links from each of the presentations. So feel free to relax and know that any relevant links will be shared with you afterwards. We'd also really love if you could share your feedback. So I'm going to be putting a link into the chat if you have to go early. It's really helpful for us to understand what you thought of this webinar, what you'd like of future webinars. We are always kind of forming and planning our future webinars, so it's helpful to know what topics you're interested in. So next slide, please. This presentation is the second of a 6-month series featuring presentation from the Growing School Garden Summit that we were a part of in April of earlier this year. The Growing School Garden Summit was hosted by the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation and was put on in partnership with the SGSO Network and Life Lab. All the presentations that are part of this webinar series were given at the summit. So we've updated them and translated them into a virtual format to allow you all who maybe didn't attend the summit or did and didn't get to see these particular presentations take part and learn from them. All of our presenters are given a stipend for their time, which is being supported by the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation. So the next slide will show kind of the upcoming schedule that continues through March, includes a variety of presentations. Hope you can join us. Everything from professional development, to music in the garden, to decolonizing garden education. So we've got some stuff lined up for the next 6 months. And then specifically, our next slide shows that our next webinar will be all about sustainable professional development frameworks that'll be presented by the Florida Department of Florida Ag in the Classroom. So if you are, especially if you're a school garden support organization and you run professional development, this will be a deep dive into professional development frameworks, and that's on November 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific. Next, just really quickly, just want to highlight that we have a new newsletter where we're specifically highlighting different pieces of the SGSO network resources, all within a specific theme. If you aren't already on the newsletter, I encourage you to join us. And then finally, I also want to just make sure that you are aware of our Google Forum, which is an engaged network of folks, of school garden professionals, all chatting about different topics within school gardens. So head to our website to join specifically the forum and be in conversation with one another. Great. Well, that's all the updates I want to share about the SGSO network. I'm going to now pass it off to Sam Ullery, who will be our MC and kind of facilitator for today's webinar. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Tristana. Hi, everybody. Yes, I am Sam. I am a board member of the SGSO network, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, Marielle Hampton, who is an extension agent for intergenerational programs and youth development.
Thanks so much for having me. So my name is Marielle Hampton. I am an extension agent for intergenerational programs with the University of Hawaii. So my programs are aimed at residents of all ages, but with the pandemic, we needed to connect youth and elders safely. So with my community partners, Māla and Kumukia, we piloted a program called Keiki to Kupuna, which is child to elder, where students grew plants, assembled gardening kits, and wrote letters for delivery to older adults on our island. Next slide. The point of this talk is not to show you how to run a pandemic container gardening program or to make you all jealous that I live in Hawaii. I just want us to consider how different generations are segregated in our society and how our gardens can help this to change. Kids spend all day at school with peers their age. Young and middle-aged adults are clustered at work. And if elders gather, it's often for activities aimed exclusively at their age group. Age-restricted housing is the norm for millions of college students and elders. Many youth may not interact with elders at all, but as our population ages, we need to build understanding and connection to bridge the gap between generations. Next slide. As educators and program leaders, our work with gardens and youth should embrace this opportunity. Intergenerational programs strengthen the bonds between different age groups with positive outcomes for everyone involved. For adults, working with youth can build a sense of connection and purpose, teach new skills, reduce isolation, and help them feel valued. And on the other end, youth in intergenerational programs can learn skills and build confidence while enjoying the companionship and attention of older adults. These programs can also help break down misconceptions and stereotypes about older people. Next slide. For our program, we wanted to get older adults hooked on gardening by giving them a little taste through their own container garden. With our school garden partner, Māla, students turned from gardeners into nursery managers. They propagated and grew out plants and prepared them for delivery. And each student also wrote a letter and a self-addressed envelope that was delivered to the elders with their plant kits. Next slide. Early disappointments could put off new gardeners, and we wanted these elders to feel that magic of eating something that they grew and picked themselves. We gave them easy to grow plants that were already near maturity, so they wouldn't face as many setbacks. And with the help of volunteer master gardeners and project partners, we checked in periodically through email, Zoom, and phone calls, and provided replacement plants as needed. Next slide. After a few months, we did brief post surveys to get a sense of the program impact. All of the respondents from the older adults group said that they tried new recipes and had more flavorful food as a result of the program. And the majority enjoyed cooking more and saved money from buying less ingredients. For youth in the program, we found a 67% increase in the number reporting that they knew how to find help for plant problems and a 300% increase in those reporting that they'd eaten something they grew themselves. Next slide. During the pandemic, we protected our elders by keeping our distance, but as restrictions are lifting now, we can look for opportunities to bring older generations together with youth in the garden. School gardens are the perfect setting for workshops or work days that encourage different ages to interact by building worm bins, planting, cooking, or harvesting flowers to make bouquets. Next slide. I just want to leave you with these photos of two of our program participants, Braden and Fred. Braden is a gifted young gardener, and he was matched with Fred, a retired teacher with stories of growing up in a sugar plantation town where everyone grew their own food. They had a great connection and exchanged letters even after the program ended. So I just want to encourage you all to consider the value of bringing intergenerational projects to your garden, whether it's a partnership with a local senior center, family-oriented work days, or a workshop that invites older adults to join your students in the garden. For the sake of our students and our society, let's find ways to garden across generations. Next slide. All right, thanks so much for your time, and please feel free to reach out. I hope that this presentation might just plant a little seed of inspiration, and I really look forward to hearing about your own intergenerational garden programs in the coming years.
Thank you so much for that. So we are going to spend a couple minutes now, about 3 minutes, reflecting on what was just presented. And the reflection question is, how could you involve different generations in your gardening programming? We're going to be sharing your responses and reflections in a Jamboard. The link was just dropped in the chat. So please take about 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to click on that Jamboard and add any reflections that you have to that. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Thank you all. Thank you all for sharing in the Jamboard. Please finish up what you are thinking and writing, but we're going to keep moving here to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Jacqueline Lacey. Jacqueline is an environmental education resource teacher at Kimbark Elementary School in San Bernardino.
Hello, And thank you for this time. We are talking about drive-through gardening, helping our students garden during distance learning. Next slide, please. I'm Jackie Lacey. I'm an environmental education resource teacher at Kimbark Elementary School. And as part of my job, I get the privilege of gardening with students from transitional kindergarten, which is pre-K, all the way through 6th grade. So I see about 350 students a week, and we get to spend lots of time in this beautiful garden. Next slide, please. And our students love it. They go out, they take care of the plants, they pick the veggies, they eat them right out of the garden. And when we got shut down for COVID and went to a distance learning model, and our school district was shut down for the entire 2020-2021 school year, a question I received from students every day was, how are the veggies doing? What's happening in our garden? And so we decided, how do we reach students when we aren't at school? And for us, our students are inner city students. We bus in about 90% of them from the inner city of San Bernardino. The majority of our students come from below poverty lines and don't have access to safe outdoor areas. So we started thinking about ways that we could do a drive-through garden event. Next slide, please. The first thing we did was we contacted some agencies, our Resource Conservation District, our water company. I looked for a grant through CalAg in the classroom. I asked our administrators, our rec aides, all of our different staff members if they would participate. And we modeled it in the way we were doing our grab and go supplies throughout the school year. So the students and their families enter in their vehicle on one side of the campus, they drive through, pick up their supplies, and they exit on the other side of the campus. So we thought, why not try it and see what happens? Next slide, please. The first thing we did was we made some really awesome presentations using the computer. But because our school site is in Devore, California, which is a very rural part of San Bernardino, of course, technology did not work on that day. But the idea was they were going to see some presentations that were put together by myself and our Resource Conservation District. They had YouTube links for their Bluetooth so they could hear students who had recorded from home information. But that's how technology is sometimes. So I think the best part about this was our staff stepped up, and because we had some other resources, we were able to continue with our presentation. Next slide, please. We have just one of our rec aides here sharing information on water conservation. Next slide, please. Each station had information about parts of plants or gardening to help our families understand what they were going to be doing at home, what the end goal was, and to have a little more information on plant care and how to help their kids take care of their plants. Next slide, please. So I made some handy dandy posters as backup with some talking points for our staff so it wouldn't be too strenuous for them. Each car spent about 1 minute with a staff member, and we ended up having 100 vehicles come through on this particular day. Next slide, please. Some of our topics included parts of plants, soil, healthy eating. Next slide, please. Some of our amazing staff people who came out and shared information, talked to parents. I think the best thing was that the students were so excited to see some of their teachers and other staff members that they hadn't seen for almost a year. Next slide, please. So the cars drove through. We had our local transportation agency gave us cones to create switchbacks, which allowed us to kind of control traffic. We also used an online booking system, think holiday lights, so that we could book appointments and keep the amount of cars low. Next slide, please. At the end, they saw me and they received a bag of goodies that allowed them to go home and plant their own plant. Next slide, please. Here's just kind of the things that we had. These were all from the donations or from the grant that we received from Ag in the Classroom. Next slide, please. Just happy people receiving their information. Next slide, please. And then anybody who felt comfortable at the end could take a picture just to commemorate the day with our backdrop. Next slide, please. I just have a couple of slides of information. You'll have these so that you can decide how you might use this information with your school. Think outside the box. It could be more than just gardening, but it's definitely a way to reach lots of families in a time when you're social distancing or you can't meet in person. Next slide, please. And there's some more resources for you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We are going to move into our reflection question now. Please add to the Jamboard in the chat. The question is, how would you provide gardening access to your students who either don't have local resources or outdoor spaces, or during a long absence from the school? So let's take a couple of minutes to work on that. Thank you. I'll just quickly mention that if you go to the top of the Jamboard, you will see you can scroll through different pages, and we are on page 2. Okay, thank you all for providing your reflections. We are going to move on to our third speaker, Megan Mannion from Barnett Elementary School in Temecula. I think I said that right. Sorry if I didn't. California.
So yes, my name is Megan, and I am a literacy specialist at Barnett Elementary School. I also run our green team and our school garden program. Next year, I'll be transitioning to our high school teaching regenerative agriculture. So this is my last year in elementary, but I'm excited to share some of the events that we do at our school. We've grown our garden program pretty extensively over the past 9 years. I try to get every family involved, and one way that we do that is on our STEM night, STEAM night. We just gave it a little bit of a twist, and we usually hold this annual event during Earth Month, which is when we have Earth Day. So go ahead, next slide. So Stream night is what we call it. I had to have an R in there for reading since I am a reading specialist, and we are constantly reading everything. So it just seemed fitting. And I love puns or to make acronyms out of everything. So we went with We All Live Downstream with a focus on water conservation. I believe the statistics are like 97% of California is in a drought. And we definitely feel it here in Southern California. We have a lot of vineyards and citrus groves locally. And I also work in a vineyard, and we had a lot of issues with the heat this year. Go ahead, next. So to get an event like this started, we definitely reach out to as many community connections as possible. For our stream night, we definitely partnered up with the water district. Water districts have a lot of money allocated for school programs. So definitely reach out to them. They have a lot of resources to share. Waste management in your area is also a good resource. You can reach out to local nurseries. Where we live, we have some that are just focused on native and drought tolerant plants. Master gardeners and local farmers are amazing friends to have as well. And then reaching out to the high school clubs or high school students for volunteers. Find your friends that you work with, teachers and other family volunteers. And another place to reach out is your health food stores. They can help out with support, with giving you food, donating, just another good resource to look into. Next slide. So for science, for the science section of our stream night, we definitely focused on the water cycle. The students in our garden club, we are making a gray water system with our washing sink. So that has been a project that's been going on since last year. So that is something we'll incorporate in our stream night so that the families can see what we're working on. We'll have students run it to show parents what we're doing and families that are visiting how gray water systems work. We also do water sampling and testing. Where we live in our community, we have a lake. So the students love to collect samples from the lake and see what's going on in there. Also wastewater treatment, that's another thing. They came out to visit and taught our kids how to make toilet bombs that were earth friendly, using baking soda, I think citric acid, essential oils. So the students were really excited to make toilet bombs, and that's another thing they'll be doing at our stream night. Also water friendly creations. They like to make all sorts of different things with water. Go ahead, next slide. Here is one of them. We did a water cycle in a bottle. And any event we have throughout the year, my garden partner and I, we always throw up a sensory board about our garden. We usually will have things grown in our garden. We'll talk about drought tolerant plants and then just different irrigation techniques that we do as well. Next slide. Technology. Technology has been fun with the kids. We have a lot of tech experts now since we were shut down for a while. There is so much data on water cycles available online. These are just a few of our resources. One of the things that was really fascinating is that we were given a microscope that hooks up to a computer. So the students will take those water samples that are from the lake and they will put it on slides on the microscope and then check out what's going on in the water on the screen. So we've found all sorts of fun bacteria and all sorts of fun things in the water in our lake. Next slide. Reading, since we had to add the R for reading, we have two on campus outdoor libraries in both of our gardens on campus. So we do like to fill them up with all sorts of books on gardening, but especially for stream night, we have a bunch on water conservation. There are so many books available. Even if you go on Amazon and just type in water conservation books for kids, you'll find a ton. We did get a grant from Literacy for Life, and we were able to get quite a few books. So those are some of the things we will have in our library this year. Also, guest readers are really great to have. Our city council, they like to get involved. So we invite them to be guest readers as well. Next slide. Engineering is always great for kids. I feel that most of the kids love to build and construct things. I love it that we're back in school and in our garden so that they are using their hands, fine motor skills to be creating things for our garden. The gray water system is one of the things the students are definitely working on right now. In the past, we've had boat races where the kids had to make boats out of different material that they find. And then this year we are going to incorporate water rockets. So they're very excited. We also do water filtration, floating flowers. They can pick flowers to see how they float, or also they can make them with paper and they kind of open up and float. And then another thing that we are working on this year is a slake test to incorporate, where they can use the soil in our garden to show how healthy it is. Next slide. Here are some of our boats that students made in the past. Next slide. Oh, and art. Art's a favorite for everyone. There's so many things you can do with art: veggie stamping, fruit stamping. Kids like to spray water on a tree or paint a tree with water. It's all good fun. Next slide. Here are some other art projects that students led in the garden. Next slide. Mathematics. These are some of the things that we do with math: square foot gardening, measuring water, water filtration, and soil percolation and irrigation. Next slide. Here are some third graders hooking up irrigation. They're very talented and extremely good at it. Next slide. And the highlight of Barnett Stream Night was the edible aquifers that our Rancho Water District provided for everyone that came. Next slide. And then we had waste management brought worm bins out. Next slide. And then our local high school, they have biosustainability, where they built an aquaponic greenhouse and they do science camps. They joined us as well. Next slide. And then our students researched about how bugs, if you grow bugs for food, it saves water. So they want to highlight this in our next Stream Night as well. Next slide. Thank you so much for listening to me today. If you want to follow our garden program and green team, there we are on Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. We're going to actually do the reflection question, but then roll right into our next presenter in the interest of time. So the reflection question is, who in your community would be willing to help create a similar event? What resources do you already have? And so please go to the Jamboard, the link in the Jamboard, and provide some reflections there. And this, like I said, is going to be abbreviated because we're going to roll right into our next presentation here in about 30 seconds. So be ready. Okay, our next presenter is Lydia Oliver. She is a BA in Environmental Studies and Master's in Architecture and Regenerative Studies. All right, Lydia, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Lydia Olivier, like you said, and I am sharing today about my study I did in my regenerative studies degree. However, I'm also the chair of Garden School Foundation, who I will be talking about the base camp garden that they actually occupy. So today I'll be talking about my research on ecosystem benefits and climate mitigation in urban agroforestry in 1 acre on a living schoolyard. Next. First, I'd like to talk a bit about my childhood, how it contributed to my research on living schoolyards. This is me at 8 years old on a schoolyard with a forest. I was living in Rabat, Morocco with my family in the Peace Corps. This was a very new experience living in an urban area where services like local transportation were limited, so walking was a priority everywhere. The climate was hot and humid, but I don't ever recall feeling uncomfortable. This is when I started connecting my well-being and the land around me. The schoolyard forest was actually a working sericulture or silkworm farm that we interacted with, and we would often be given silkworms to take home to watch the cycles of them turning into moss. The ecosystem services that were available to me via the trees, shrubs, herbaceous, ground cover, even weeds, contributed to the clean air I breathed, provided food and plant biodiversity, and little did I know at the time, provided regeneration and soil formation, nutrient and hydrological cycles, and contributed to immaterial ecosystem services, which are cultural, which was the well-being portion. And this definitely helped my educational experience. Next slide. So you all are probably familiar with this: an asphalted playground void of ecosystem services or benefits to children, and trees are similarly affected. Advance. Advance. Sorry, there's a slight delay in the. So you're probably, there we go. So you're probably familiar, I'm sorry, going on. So I questioned, how does the practice of urban agroforestry aid in the climate mitigation and adaptation to build the resilience of urban trees and people who use schoolyards? Next slide. So an agroforest mimics a natural forest with layers, the tree as the main element matched with the agriculture as an understory. This can be applied for climate mitigation with the result in increase of available ecosystem services than an urban forest planted alone. Next slide. So I compared 2 acres, and the first acre was the Lao Center for Regenerative Studies. You can advance to the talking point. At Cal Poly Pomona University. Measurements are accomplished through a citizen science with a baseline of 20 trees, and the pervious green parts of the area were about 59%. Next slide. So I talk a little about the results. There's a highs and lows, and there's lots of metrics to go into this, but the highest accumulation in CO2, next, in the trees and large shrubs with woody shrubs, herbaceous, and weeds contributed to a small portion of that. Next, the particulate matter offset freeway pollution, but there is also an additional buffer beyond the 1 steady acre site. It was high and avoided stormwater runoff from established native California deep root systems, but mostly that were mostly black walnut trees. There was food, energy, and calories for 325 students over 10 months. And there was carbon storage, which was high in the woody plants with lower values in the soil storage. Next slide. So the other school that I compared it with is where Garden School Foundation is based. And it's 1 acre at a 24th Street School Elementary School within LAUSD. Measurements were accomplished through citizen science with a baseline of 20 trees again, and the pervious green area was 57%. Next slide. So the results, highest accumulation in CO2 was in the woody trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants. The particulate matter offset contributed to some of the freeway pollution, and then was high and avoided stormwater runoff established by the California native deep root systems, but even higher in the raised beds. Food calories available were for 444 students over 10 months. Plant biodiversity was higher because of the variety in the understory, particularly in the raised beds. And then carbon storage was high in woody plants with higher values in soil storage. Next slide. So I want to acknowledge the environmental justice impact. I acknowledge that the original caretakers of the land in my research are the Tonga people and all their ancestors, elders, and all their descendants present and emerging. And the Los Angeles Unified School District is the largest guest landowner of 6,500 acres with over 1,000 K through 12 schools. So you can imagine what that impact could be if you had these metrics over all of the district. So here's my contact and the link to my research. And if you'd like to be further, thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I was doing my best to keep up with you on the slides, so I
Yeah.
apologize if I added any confusion there. That was great. So
No
we're going to
worries.
move on to our reflection question. What other conservation efforts could illustrate the value in naturalizing a schoolyard like an agroforest food forest? Great. So we'll take about 2 minutes in the Jamboard. Please add your reflections. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next speaker here very shortly. Before I do that, I want to remind folks that there is a Q&A session after this last speaker, who is next. And so if you do have any questions for any of the presenters, please put it in the chat. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end to get to some questions. So this is just a reminder to folks, last chance to get questions in for presenters. And with that, I'm presenting our last presenter, Mercedes Tishner from Stenson University in Florida.
Hi, thank you, Sam. I'm glad to be with you today. I am talking about a project that we did in Florida. Just Do It, top 5 garden-based learning tips. So next slide, please. So our project is actually a partnership between our university, our education and environmental students, teachers in our local area, local extension office, and we have some master gardeners who helped us with this project. The school we worked at was a local elementary school. It was a Title I school. Many of the teachers at this school had very little gardening experience. Others had a bit more. We were very fortunate that we had some grant funding. So for this project, we were able to buy some resources, including books and seeds and hoses. We were also able to provide a very small stipend to the teachers at the school who worked with us on the school-based gardening project. Each of the teachers was provided a garden bed, and the garden bed was located around their classroom. We were trying to get most of the garden beds really close to their classroom. So some teachers had them right outside their door. Other teachers had the garden beds someplace on campus. Okay, next. Oh, so at the end of the school year, what we did is we collected data from focus groups, and we interviewed all of the grade level teams. So we had 18 total participants. This was about a 45-minute focus group at each grade level. And so the tips that we gathered came directly from the teachers in this focus group. So we'll start with tip number 5. So tip number 5 was to utilize support systems, use the volunteers or fellow teachers as much as you can. Teachers from every grade level told us that it was really important that they had some support, whether it was the pre-service teachers from our university or fellow teachers or the garden masters. But many of the teachers said that they would not have done anything with garden-based learning if they didn't have the support. It was interesting because our 5th grade team, they looked at the gardens as a unit. And so they helped everybody, all the 5th grade teachers helped each other with all of the maintenance, with the the lessons, with everything that was related to the garden. And it made a big difference because they did really well all year long with this project. Okay, next slide. All right, so tip number 4 from the teachers has to do with location, location, location. So teachers highlighted the importance of where their garden beds were. So they said it was really important that their garden beds were close to water, or at least the water source. The distance from the classroom made a big difference. If the garden bed was really close to their classroom, right outside the door, or if they had to walk across campus to get to their garden beds. And they also thought it was important where the garden beds were located, if there was a sun or shade. Stetson University is in Central Florida. We get lots and lots of sun here. So the teachers who were assigned the beds in more shaded spots around the campus really had better success with their gardens. Also, our 5th grade team, they also had a lot of success because their beds were the closest to the faucets and the hoses. Tip number 3, okay, good. So tip number 3 had to do with synchronizing the calendars, the garden calendar and the school year calendar. Teachers thought it was really important that the garden-based learning be a natural extension of their classrooms, and they didn't want it to be just an add-on. So their tip was to look at the district curriculum maps and make sure that you are really integrating the garden-based learning with the content that is supposed to be taught. All right, tip number 2. Tip number 2 has to do with integrating garden-based learning into teacher education. So most of the teachers in our study wish that they had more gardening experience from their teacher prep programs. And that's something that we're working on at our university to really integrate garden-based learning into various methods courses. They thought that if they had been exposed to more garden-based learning during their pre-service education, it would have been easier for them to understand and actually do garden-based learning. And tip number 1 has to do with just do it. We ended every focus group with the question, what advice would you give teachers who want to garden with their students? And almost all of the grade level teams said something like, just do it. Okay, last slide. So we have our QR code here that you can scan to read the entire article that talks about this research. But the final sort of the tip with the just do it, teachers were telling us that despite the challenges and the frustrations, and we had challenges and frustrations, we had some successes too, but they said that all the teachers agreed that gardening, even unsuccessful gardening, was better than nothing, and they felt that their students enjoyed it, their students learned from it. So again, just do it was their final tip. So I guess I would like to share with you that as a university faculty member, if you have a local university in your area, to please reach out to them and ask if they have pre-service teachers, any environmental students who could help with the school gardenings. That's been a big success in the schools, is offering our students to help. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. And our last reflection question is, what garden-based learning tips would you offer that weren't mentioned by the teachers in our focus groups? So please go to the Jamboard and share those tips. All right, we are going to be wrapping up here in the next couple minutes. I would like to take a few minutes. We don't have too many questions. If you do, please share. I'm going to ask the panelists if you can share any of the a reflection that really resonated with you. That if you had a chance to read them. I would love for you to come off mute and share that, and I can move over to your question if you'd like while you do that. So if there's any reflections that really resonated with you from the audience, or something that kind of made you think, that would be great to share now.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So for the intergenerational program ideas, there were a lot of great reflections, both on things that have already been done as well as ideas for the future. A lot of folks mentioned that retired folks make great volunteers in school gardens. They have the time and the interest a lot of the times to be involved. And you can try to tap into family members, older family members of your students for that. But personally, I loved the thought that someone had about doing cooking classes and sharing recipes from elders' childhoods with the students. Personally, I love doing cooking and trying to incorporate that in the garden. And so being able to bring in these childhood recipes from folks in the community, I think is a great way of both getting them to share a little bit about what they ate and did growing up, and helping the students to gain some appreciation for that while trying some new foods.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to share?
I'll share, Sam. Some of the comments that I really loved, and it really spoke to what the teachers were saying too, was this idea of starting small. It doesn't need to be, it's not an all or nothing situation. And I think that's such great advice, because it's not an all or nothing. And then keep planting. Not all will be successful, but never give up. So these were the kinds of things at the end of our project that our teachers sort of came up with, that they have to start small and they just have to keep doing it. So thank you for all the comments. I also love the comments about getting students involved in the planning process.
Thank you, Mercedes. I'll add that we had a question if panelists could share their social media information in the chat. I think we have some people that want to give you some shout outs. Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is. I think we have time for maybe one or two more panelists, if you have any reflections.
I'll go. I saw one was sending home the ingredients for like a salsa for them to make at home. I thought that was kind of interesting, especially since we tend to grow a lot of jalapenos and bell peppers and tomatoes in our garden. And then another was like cooking ideas with the kids. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really like, I can't remember who said it, but I really like the comment that, even if you have a failed garden, the kids still enjoy, being there and the whole experience, because I think gardening is all about failing and then getting to the next step. So, and you're never an expert in doing this. So I really, really appreciate that comment.
All right, I'm going to pass it back to Tristana.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for, I'll say thank you to each of our presenters for sharing your expertise, your experience. And I super loved ending on that note, Lydia, with whatever you do is, as long as it's outside in a garden with children, is impactful in any way, shape, or form. And the lesson of failing in and of itself is very impactful. So thank you for everything you shared, for your time today. Thank you for all for engaging with us and sharing your reflections in the Jamboard. And also thank you to Sam for being our facilitator. I'm not sure if he shared, but he's the school garden specialist at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education for Washington, D.C. And Sam is also on our the governance board for the SGSO network. So he was involved in helping to plan this webinar series and does a number of other things for the SGSO network. So thank you, Sam. If you'd like to follow the SGSO network, you can do so at SGSO Network at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So for those of you who are interested in that, and feel free to shoot me an email with any questions. I would love to get your feedback. So let us know what you thought about this webinar and also what you would like to learn from us, hear from other experts in the field on different topics within school gardening. So please head to that link there in the chat to fill out our survey. With that, I will close our webinar and see you all next month. Thank you so much for joining us.